Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Limiting Principle Podcast Productions, the newest episode of Derp Courses, where I, your magnanimous host, Patrick, details James Lindsay's collapse and devolution into exactly what he claimed to hate. Today, we're going to be talking about something, and it involves a Israeli woman filming a movie about Tehran or something, and she was dead. A Thinks Aloud here says another Israel supporter is dead. All available facts indicate that pro-Israel is the most dangerous opinion to have. Interesting. But before we get to that, a couple months ago, James Lindsay appeared on Mikhail Olson's YouTube channel, and the entire episode was about the woke right. And I really think that James Lindsay presents a very interesting case for what exactly woke right is, and the analogy he uses. Like I'm hesitant to throw around the word genius, but in this case, it honestly might be warranted.
Intended turning point in terms of how the dynamic is playing out with the death butterfly.
What's a death butterfly? How does the woke right, and James Lindsay's talking about the woke right here, and he's saying death butterfly as an analogy. How could the woke right be a death butterfly? I'm sure James is going to clear it up. I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
And then you have, like I said, the Tucker Fuentes, Kevin Roberts catastrophe that happened, quite a bit later, that has now awakened the public to basically, so in our timeline, you have the alt-right caterpillar goes into the infiltrate.
The woke right caterpillar goes into the infiltrate. So far, it's interesting. Let's keep going.
Pupa comes out as the death butterfly. Just
okay, so the woke right infiltrate goes into the pupa and comes out as the death butterfly. That's what we have so far. Let's keep going.
Before Trump's election last year, and now all of a sudden people are like, oh shit, there's a death butterfly.
So the woke right it was a pupa, and it burrowed its way into the Trump administration. And then when it emerged into what he's calling a death butterfly. And what did he say there at the end?
And now all of a sudden people are like, oh shit, there's a death butterfly.
So now people are aware that the death butterfly exists. Interesting.
And so the death butterfly, I don't know what.
Yeah, Mikhail Olson says, oh yeah, totally, dude. Totally. Death butterfly from the pupa burrowing its way into Trump's brain. Totally on board, James.
We've done to it yet, but it is freaking the hell out and acting very erratically.
The death butterfly is going insane, and nobody can tell what it's going to do. It's completely unpredictable, ladies and gentlemen.
And making things a lot worse. It's like, I don't know, Mothra or whatever. It's just
okay, interesting. Mothra, which is a moth, is also the death butterfly. So the woke right was the pupa, and then it became the death butterfly, and the death butterfly is also Mothra. That's interesting. I mean, there's no way that he's just talking out of his ass here, right? There's no way that he's just making shit up. There's no way that he actually can to really engage in any of the ideas, and he's just using woke right to smear anyone who he disagrees with. And his redefining of woke now, shockingly, very conveniently allows only James to describe what woke is. Right? That's what you redefine woke until you want to control it, is basically what James is doing here. Because I know James would call me woke right, which is interesting because I disagree with a lot of the voices on the dissident right, and I don't really consider myself woke because I think woke is a specific thing. It's many things. There's many facets to it. But in terms of this, there's just no way, James. Like, I'm sorry. There's no such thing as
death butterfly. James Lindsay, woke wizard. Beware the death butterfly is coming for you.
Now, on to more serious matters. Now, this is not something that I want to discuss. And I'll get into that a little bit, but let's just jump right into it. I mentioned before this A Thinks Loud person posted another Israel supporter is dead. All available facts indicate that pro-Israel is the most dangerous opinion to have. Now, so far, this was, as I said before, her name is Dana Eden. She's an Israeli producer for an Apple Plus TV show about Tehran. Now, as of now, this is a couple days ago. As of now, there is no evidence to suggest that she was murdered. The police that were on site have basically already ruled out foul play. Okay? So, A Thinks Aloud is just fear-mongering here. She's just fear-mongering, saying that, look, if you support Israel, that means they're going to kill you. Now, why am I showing this? Why am I showing you what A Thinks Aloud says? Well, if you're looking at the screen, I'm going to scroll up. James Lindsay, anti-communist, reposted. And then, of course, I shared this and said, James Lindsay sharing agitprop, insinuating that a woman may have been murdered because she was Jewish, even though the police suspect no foul play. How is this any different than when a leftist posts about a trans woman being murdered because they were trans, but it turns out they OD'd, right? If somebody did that about a trans woman, just a man pretending to be a woman, James Lindsay used to write a 5,000 word X, or back then Twitter post, about how this is an active measure and about how this person is using dialectics. They're a dialectical agent. They're trying to confuse you. They're trying to build a narrative. They're trying to build a narrative around trans people being oppressed, being attacked, right? And what happens when they do that, okay? You have more and more voices on the left talking about trans women being attacked, trans women being attacked. So the average person on the left goes, oh man, there's an epidemic of trans violence. There's an epidemic of trans hatred. What does that do? It just creates tension between the left and the right. Yes, there are people on the right that wish death upon trans people. The overwhelming majority of them and all of the prominent voices, no, they don't. They just want to stop giving them these special protections, these privileges in law, get this stuff out of schools, get drag queens away from kids, and shut down the experiments on kids. Me, personally, I would like to shut down the experiments on everyone. But of course, as we're seeing, you saw recently the AMA, along with, I believe, the Plastic Surgeons Guild, that's not what they're called, but basically a prominent body of plastic surgeons, like the most prominent in the United States of America, and the AMA, the American Medical Association, has come out and said they no longer support the transitioning of kids. And if you read what they said, they literally admit that there's no evidence. And of course, there never has been evidence. You see, little by little, this is trickling out. And once everyone finds out what they've been doing to kids, just experimenting on them, cutting them up based on nothing but insanity, the whole process of being trans will be so looked down upon and these children be portrayed as the victims they are, that the entire concept is largely going to be demonized. Now, with the left, there will be a lot of empathy and feeling bad for the people that have been tricked into this, which of course, that is what they should do, right? But there's going to be a lot of anger at these politicians that have been pushing it and the doctors, aka butchers, that have been doing this. But in the meantime, the left has been saying, right, trans people are in danger, trans people are in danger, trans people in danger. And who are they in danger from? The right. The right is the one that's passing the anti-trans bills. So more and more attention is built up by the left, pretending that these trans people are under attack. And the voters on the left then go, oh, who are they under attack from? The right. See, the right are the fascists. The right are the Nazis. And what does that do? It creates more and more tension and furthers that dialectic and ratchets up that tension more and more. James Lindsay used to point that out all the time and saying that the people that would do that on the left, fear-mongering that this group of people are under attack, were dialectical agents, and they were just engaging in the dialectic, as he would say, and making these worse. That's exactly what he's doing here. It is exactly what he's doing here. He's sharing agitative propaganda designed to create this idea that all Jews and all Israelis are under attack. And so all that does is, again, further drive conflict. So he's engaging in the exact same behavior that he used to admonish people for, justifiably so, in the past, right? Attacks on critical race theory, right? Was, oh, we don't want you teaching kids that they're born racist, right? What is that posited? How is that presented by the left? Oh, it just means they hate black people. Jewish woman found dead in, I think, her hotel room while filming a TV show. No signs of foul play by the police. Well, it actually means that Jews are being targeted. Jews are being systematically targeted for extermination. That's the narrative that James Lindsay wants to drive into your head. And what does that do? It only makes things worse. Why is James Lindsay doing that? Why is he doing it? I don't know. Well, actually, I mean, I think I do know. I think I do know. Which brings me to this. So this person, this like obvious psychological operation, I'm not even paying attention to her because I cannot pay attention to any of these people, specifically when they come out in terms of like Christianity versus Judaism, anything involving the Jewish question. I'll talk about that, but she's some Catholic lady saying, I'm not going to bow down to the God of Israel, blah, 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 blah. And she's very histrionic, absurd, just not somebody that you ever want to listen to. Okay. So she said, I'll see you tonight, Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian. Thank you for standing up for Catholics and people of faith in America. Mainstream media is silent. However, the American people are fed up. The tide is shifting. Catholics are anti-Semites. And how dare they say that about my religion simply because we don't worship a foreign nation and excuse genocide. Okay. But she's also calling people goy. She's like, oh, good goy. You're a good goy. And when somebody like her says that, that means that you're a worshiper of the Jews. And so people who are prone to see Jew hatred everywhere are going to see that. And that's only going to ratchet up that tension. Right. And then James Lindsay, on the other hand, is going to say this person just hates Jews. This person's just hates Jews. What is that? That just plays into the other side of the dialectic. And then you have these two polar opposite positions that this Kerry person, the Jews are bad. The Jews are all bad. They want to enslave the Goyim. They want to enslave the Gentiles. They're all evil. And then James Lindsay, the Jews are good. They're all good. And if you criticize anything involving Israel or Judaism, that just means you hate Jews and you're running a dialectical operation in order to separate Judaism and Israel from America. Now, keep in mind, James Lindsay has in the past said that the term Judeo-Christian was specifically created as a sort of a dialectical operation, as James Lindsay would say, in order to tie politically and religiously America to Israel and Israel to America. He openly admitted that Judeo-Christian, in the context that it's being used now, by trying to equate the Jews of the Second Temple of the Old Testament with the modern state of Israel, he openly admitted that it was all nonsense. It was all BS. Now, if anyone says that, James Lindsay's just calling you a Jew hater. He's just calling you an anti-Semite. And I quote tweeted this lady, and I said, the dumbest and most bad faith people were always going to be the voices that are amplified when it comes to the Jewish question. Both sides, Kerry versus Lindsay in this instance, because he's been like calling her like a dumb hag and stuff. And then she's, yelling at him, saying that he's a slave to the Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Both positions, Kerry versus Lindsay, have bits of truth and falsehood sprinkled throughout. The purpose is only designed to further this dialectic. Now, again, like I said before, right? Somebody criticizes critical race theory on the right, the left says they're racist, okay? And then actual people on the right don't want to get into the particulars of critical race theory, and they just don't like black people. So you have the leftists who are saying that they hate black people, and then you have people on the right saying, oh, well, they just hate all white people, which is kind of true. It's true in a roundabout sense. It's largely true. They've been manipulated into viewing white people as their oppressors, so they're becoming more and more enraged by white people. But you end up having these two false dichotomies, that the right just hates black people and that the left are the champions of the black people. What does that do? It further tensions. It further creates more and more tension. until all of this built up energy is accumulated, and that energy has to be directed somewhere. So if you have two opposing sides, each marrying truth to a lie, that is literally the entire purpose of these conflicts that are being put in play. The dialectic around Jews, the Jewish question, the dialectic around black people and white people with critical race theory and white people being cast as the oppressor, regardless of whether or not white Christians in the past saw what other white Christians had enslaved black people and said, hey, that's actually not cool. Maybe we should get rid of that. Right? They never look at it like that. They never thank the white Christians for freeing them from the slavery, because they just lump all white Christians in the past into one racist slaveholder demographic. There's no nuance there. So you have that dialectic. You have the queer dialectic with the normies on the left overall thinking that transgenderism, educational books surrounding homosexuality being in schools and libraries, they think that's just about representation, right? But that's actually not what it's about. Obviously, we know they're grooming kids into this because they believe that sexuality, gender, reality itself is completely socially constructed. So if you get to the kids earlier, you can actually turn them queer, which is kind of true. You actually can do that. Now, I believe it is a false consciousness that is placed on these kids. And it's our responsibility to free them of that false consciousness. And so they could go back to their default setting of being normal people. And then they could have their own experiences and personalities that build them into the person they eventually come to be. But in terms of the queer thing, you have the leftists saying they want to kill all the queers. And then on the opposite side, you have the extreme minority of people talking about how they want to stone gays, how they want to round out gays. They want to hang them. Okay. What's that doing? That is a dialect that James Lindsay would have pointed out in the past, and he's pointed out many times. If you want to engage different people and convince them that they're on opposite sides of an issue, you have to have one side on the left driving conflict, not having any nuance, not actually getting to the truth of something, and one side on the right driving conflict, not actually getting to the truth of anything. So that is exactly what James Lindsay is doing here when it comes to Jewish people. James Lindsay, at this point, I think I'm ready to admit that James Lindsay's entire project of detailing the origins of woke and how it's purely Gnostic, that entire project was meticulously crafted from the beginning to obfuscate the esoteric strains of philosophy and theology that run through Judaism, that are largely responsible for the phenomenon known as woke, and played a huge role in it. He wants to completely obfuscate all of that. Now, many people will go, well, that's just because James serves the Jews. The Jews, Joos, right? That means that James is bought and paid for by Israel, by Benjamin Netanyahu, by some woke leftist Tikkun Olam Kabbalah Jewish NGO. And that's a very alluring concept. But here's the thing, okay? What James is doing, how he is removing all distinctions, how he's removing any nuanced conversation that can be had around the sort of woke esoteric strains running through Judaism for a long time now. By not describing that, it collapses everything and creates a two-sided dialectic. James Lindsay on one side, the Jews are all good, and the only people that criticize them are the people that hate them. And then you have maybe someone on the other side, let's say a Jake Shields. Nope, they're just evil. They're just evil, and they want to conquer the world. So if James Lindsay was interested in trying to protect the Jewish people, why is he purposely lying about the strains of woke within Judaism? Why wouldn't he detail what those strains are in the same way that he did with critical race theory and black people. What did that do? Me personally, as a former Lindsayite, that allowed me to go, oh, that's why black people are so obsessed with race. They're basically race communists because they've been turned into that. It's been like 100-year project for communists to co-opt the black mind and instill into it a racial consciousness that puts it in diametric like opposition to white people and capitalism and individualism and Western civilization itself. And so when he did that, that energy that is built up in this sort of dialectic, that there's two opposing sides of, oh, all black people are good. Oh, no, like, no, you're actually just racist. You're just racist. All black people are good. And then you have someone on the extreme side saying, no, it's just black people and they hate you. That energy that is being built up between these two false choices that is being presented to you, what happened to that? The energy dissipated. A lot of people on the right to listen to James Lindsay perhaps could have gone down a different path, but instead they saw what James Lindsay said and they went, oh, okay. So they've like kind of been brainwashed into it. And that's why you can't talk to, now you could talk to an average black person, however, it is hard to talk to them about race because they do have this sort of racial consciousness about them that puts them in opposition to white people, or at least that's what they think it does, right? But like in terms of like the black elites and black intellectuals, you can't talk to them. But the way James Lindsay broke down the information, you went, oh, that makes sense. I see. So any voice that the left uplifts when it comes to a black person and anyone like involved in the the mid-tier or higher echelons of the Democratic Party is going to be by default a black race communist. And so it allows you to understand why that happened. And for me personally, understanding something like that instills less hatred into me, because even if there's some even like a horrible person like Don Lemon or a Jasmine Crockett or anything like that. Now, Don Lemon might just be a propagandist and he knows what he's doing. But let's say that Don Lemon, Jasmine Crockett, bought into it. They're lost in the sauce and they actually think that like white people, white conservatives on the right want to like re-enslave them. Okay. It lets me know that like their mind has been co-opted by a parasitic creature. And that's why they're like that. It's the same thing with queer theory and like gay or trans or queer people or whatever. If you look at like the trans movement and the LGBTQ monolith in general, you will basically have no choice but to say that it's satanic, right? Like they're indoctrinating kids into a specific worldview, and they specifically target kids because they think that they're pre-structural and that these false structures of heteronormativity and wanting to be a part of a family and blah 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 blah. They want to get to the kids before what they view as these false structures are put in place. And then they indoctrinate them into a worldview that tells them that they weren't born a boy or a girl. It was just assigned at birth. And so if you plant that idea into a kid's head, that kid then looks at the world through that lens, through that queer social constructivist lens. So a lot of these kids don't even have gender dysphoria in the traditional sense, in that, right? Like in the 90s, some kid, a little boy thinks he's a girl, or a girl thinks he's a boy. And it's like a natural, it seems kind of to be like a sort of a naturally occurring phenomenon, right? That's kind of what we know gender dysphoria to be. But instead of that, they're actually they're implanting this child with a worldview that allows them to choose whether or not they can identify as trans, whether they can identify as queer, as non-binary. And then if they do that, they then could possibly place themselves on a path where they mutilate themselves, and they're putting porn in schools and in the libraries. And if somebody tries to take the porn out of the libraries, at least in the state of Illinois, the governor and secretary of state will literally rescind state funding for those libraries if they take those books out. And so you look at that movement, and then let's not even get into the transhumanist, post-humanist component, because that's a whole other thing. But you look at it and it is pure evil. right? There's like a doctor on some social media, and she says, she goes like, "Oh, yeet the teat," because she's removed multiple breasts of little girls. That's demonic. But see, that person, even the person pushing the ideology on the kids and the person that's cutting off the girl's breasts, at the end of the day, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but they are victims. They've been driven insane. Under normal circumstances, they would not be this way. I look at them as if I would look at one of the people in Charles Manson's cult who he brainwashed into killing for him. Yeah, they're committing evil acts, doing horrible things, killing people. But at the end of the day, Charles Manson is the villain of that story, right? Or maybe it's the CIA if he actually was programmed to if he actually was subjected to government testing. But that's a whole conspiracy theory we're not going to get into. So even your most vile person who is pushing this evil stuff is a kind of victim, even if they're massacring children and indoctrinating them into this shit. No, those people, regardless of whether or not they're insane and they don't actually realize what they're doing because they think they've been granted with the gift of actually being able to perceive reality in a true way, right? They've become enlightened individuals. They still have to be punished. You know, these doctors that are doing it, the ideologues put in jail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, but to me, I understand why they do that. And I understand why they do that because of James Lindsay. Okay. This is, to me, this is sort of like a Christian thing, like love your enemies, defeat your enemies, be merciless if you have to, extremely merciless, but you still love them because you do have to be better than them, right? You stop the doctors from experimenting on kids, you kick the indoctrinators out of the institutions, but you don't want to become them, even though you can still be merciless in your punishment for them. And so James Lindsay helped us to understand what queer theory is and how it's affected all these different people, what critical race theory is and how it's affected Black people. But he didn't do the same thing when it came to Judaism. When it came to the leftist Jewish concept of tikkun olam, of healing the world and of repairing the world, and how it translates to now essentially social justice. There's a conservative Jewish man and a Zionist who I've covered on this podcast before. You can look him up. His name is Jonathan Newman. And he has dedicated his entire life to trying to sound the alarm for this leftist woke strain that is permeated many Jewish people on the left. Why wouldn't James Lindsay go into that? Why wouldn't he detail what that is? He could even do it through his own lens if he wants to. How he could say that it's a bastardization of Judaism, and he could trace it back. And you guys can look this up. Maybe I'll detail it eventually. You can look up Sabbatai Zevi, whatever his name is. Sabbatai Zevi. You look up Isaac Luria. You can look up Yehuda Ashlag. You can look up Rav Kook, and you look in all that, and you see how this sort of woke strain, this woke strain of thought has worked its way through Judaism, and why there are so many Jews represented as like the heads or intricately involved in leftist NGOs and organizations. And to me, that makes me understand it. To me, that would make me have less animus towards one of these Jewish leftists, in the same way with Black people in critical race theory and queer and trans people with queer theory. But James Lindsay hasn't done that. He's purposely not done that. I do believe that he's purposely not done that. And instead, if anyone looks into it or says anything, he uses the most egregious examples of people saying horrible things about what they want to do with Jews, and then presents that as if that is the dominant strain of thought when it comes to being critical of some aspects of this type of Judaism, or the Tikkun Olam social justice Kabbalah Judaism on the left. And what does that do? What does that do when the left says that a trans person just wants to live their life, and the people on the right that are just fascists, they're just evil? Makes things worse. It furthers the dialectic, and it is basically, it amounts to accelerationism. By lying about that, you're accelerating the conflict. So you have like a Jake Shields who's saying all the Jews are bad. And then you have a James Lindsay. No, all the Jews are good. And they're just lying. There's nothing to see here. Don't look here. Don't look here. And you have someone like me who's like, bro, here's a video of this Jewish conservative Zionist guy who's begging for help from his people. Let's talk about this. Let's try to ease some of this tension. But James Lindsay doesn't want to hear that. And he's casting my opinion and the opinions of a bunch of other people that are very concerned about this particular dialectic that has been forming, that has been building for hundreds of years now, if not thousands. And so it's just the energy that is being built up around this dialectic. That energy is just building and building and building, and eventually it's going to be released. And I fear that something horrible is going to happen. Now, James Lindsay explained queer theory and critical race theory because he understood that there was a certain amount of energy that was being built up around that. So what do you think that he would do the same thing when it comes to this? What do you think that he would recognize the amount of energy that is being built up around the Jewish question? Why wouldn't he go into the strains of woke in Judaism? And here's the thing. So I looked at Jake Shields, and maybe someone will go, oh, he's a paid agitator or whatever. But Jake Shields to me is just mostly a retarded person. He's just a fucking idiot, right? And say then I look at these people on like James Lindsay's side that will just call you an anti-Semite. I've said this to many people, many Zionists and stuff. I've been trying to detail this to them, and they just call me a Jew hater. That person, I'm like, I understand why they think that, because they've essentially been brainwashed into thinking that any criticism involving Jewish people or Judaism is tantamount to hatred. Why do they think that? Not just because of him. There's lots of people that are engaging in this kind of behavior, but James Lindsay. Now, that person that learned to do that from James Lindsay, like say like a Mikhail Olson, right? Mikhail Olson, let's take him. I don't have anger for him because I understand why anything that I say about this to him looks like anti-Semitism. But what about James Lindsay? I cannot accept the idea that James Lindsay is operating out of ignorance and is accidentally playing into this dialectic and making things worse. Who is James Lindsay? We all know he's supposedly the anti-woke guy. But who else is he? What else is he mostly known for? Well, originally, explaining dialectics. He has studied dialectics for years. He understands exactly what drives a dialectic forward, which is why he detailed critical race theory and queer theory, because James, he says he's a classical liberal. He's not. He's a post-World War II consensus liberal, which we'll get into in a minute. But he detailed critical race theory and queer theory because he is a fan of the post-World War II consensus of civil rights era when it comes to blacks and the civil rights era when it comes to gay people, with it being slightly normalized and them getting the right to be married. And so he saw that and saw that this energy was building and that we were heading towards a cataclysmic event. And he undid these leftist spells to make someone like me realize, oh, critical race theory, queer theory, that's why this is happening. But with this situation, he's acting exactly like how a leftist acts when they say trans people just want to live their lives. They don't want to groom kids. He's doing exactly that. And James Lindsay knows exactly how dialectics work. Which I don't want to believe this. I took a year and a half off politics when James Lindsay started doing this woke right thing, because none of it made any sense to me. And everybody was angry at him, and there were some of my friends that were supporting him. And I was like, I got to take a little time off and analyze everything. So I just watched everything. So James Lindsay knows how dialectics work. He knows that energy is built up inside of this kind of dialectic, and yet he's playing into that dialectic. So does that mean that James Lindsay's doing that on purpose? Mikhail Olson, he's not doing this on purpose. He seems like a perfectly nice kid. He's just a doofus, right? When you talk to Mikhail Olson, it's like talking to James Lindsay. It's one of the worst parts about James Lindsay is that no matter where I go on the internet, even if I don't talk to James Lindsay, which I can't because he blocked me for obvious reasons, there are a million other little James Lindsays that I could talk to, because almost not all of them, but his most diehard supporters, right? They have James Lindsay standpoint epistemology. So talking to them is like talking to him. So with the knowledge that we have about how much knowledge James has about dialectics and how to diffuse tension and reduce energy in a, conflict, I'm having a hard time accepting that James Lindsay doesn't know what he's doing. This goes back to, I'm finally getting back to it. People will say, well, James Lindsay just works for the Jews. And it's like, if James Lindsay wanted to help the Jews, wouldn't he be doing everything in his power to lessen the tension? Wouldn't he be doing everything in his power to undo this particular dialectic by describing what's going on? And he's not. He's literally just playing, he's just taking a page out of the leftist handbook and calling you a bigot and a Jew hater if you say anything about this, which is only making things worse. That's actually why I started this. One of the reasons why I started this podcast, specifically why I started this Derp Courses show, because all he's doing is making things worse. And if he is doing it on purpose, that means that he's one of the greatest enemies to the Jews in existence. If he's purposely trying to make things worse and drive this forward, building up this energy, which is going to lead to something, that energy's got to go somewhere eventually. Ideally, you would like to reduce that amount of energy and reduce it to cause the least amount of harm to anyone involved. And then there's another component of this too. So James Lindsay, then he starts going to Israel. He's been to Israel, a kiss the wall. He literally released like a 50-second video of him giving like like I might as well just put like 1-800 like call Jew on the bottom of the screen. Or 1-800-1 Israel, because he was like giving like basically a promo for, I think it was Herod's temple or something like that. So he's openly supposedly advocating for Jewish people and then going to Israel, praying at a wall that he doesn't believe in. He's releasing a like 12 or 13 episode podcast series all about how Hitler is bad. Meanwhile, there are much worse things happening in the real world involving transhumanists like Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison that could be being talked about. Now, keep in mind, I asked James Lindsay about Peter Thiel, and he went, yeah, I don't really know that much to comment on it. And I was like, that was one of the things that I was like, I don't know if I could trust you. You're obsessed with transgenderism, which is just transhumanism. It's wearing a mask of gender, but it's just transhumanism. And of course, then those two things are just posthumanism. And you don't know anything about it, but you're going to release a 12 episode podcast series about Hitler. And then let's look specifically at the dialectic between the Jews and white nationalists, white identitarian people. What are some of the white identitarian people's complaints? They would largely like a, predominantly white Christian country. If you talk to a lot of them, they're like, yeah, of course minorities can live here, but we want majority white Christians in power. Okay, that's what they say. Okay. And their gripes is that Israel is essentially an ethno state with a couple little groups, but they're not, accepting infinity Bomalian immigrants. They're not accepting any of that, right? Same with a country like Japan. So these white nationalist types or just white identitarian types are like, well, why can't we have that here? And it's complicated here. It's a little too late for that at this point. But there does have to be some sort of Western identity-based chauvinism to be able to turn this around. So the white identitarians look at the Jewish people and they're like, we just want what you have. You have hundreds and thousands of groups designed to combat anti-Semitism. You are a protected class. You can't question the Holocaust in like, I don't know, over like a dozen countries, right? They want to pass laws in the United States, like, sort of like anti-free speech laws to like outlaw quote unquote anti-Semitism. Okay. And then that's like one of their large gripes when it comes to the Jewish thing, because there is this sort of white identitarian versus like Jews conflict that has been happening. If you listen to a lot of the white identitarians, that's what they say. Okay. Now think about that. James Lindsay completely on board with anything the quote unquote Jews do. And I say the Jews is in like the monolith. It's like James Lindsay. He always says, oh, they're obsessed with the Jews and Joos. Well, James Lindsay is also obsessed with his own version of the Jews, Joos, because he fetishizes the Jewish populace in like a cartoonish, a hyper real type of way, the same way that a leftist does about black people and trans people. Right. So James Lindsay is completely on board with the Jews having that. He doesn't want to have white people having that for various reasons. He doesn't want, the country based around that sort of identity. He's more of a creedal nation bro instead of a blood and soil bro. And then if anything ever happens involving like, somebody spray painting a swastika on, like a Jewish building or whatever, James Lindsay posts never again is now. But then if something happens, if something horrible happens to white people in the real world, and then a couple white people, not even like even racial identitarians, they're just like, man, white people are being targeted. James Lindsay goes, you're not a victim. You're not a victim. You're not a victim. And so this sort of like James Lindsay is essentially like the nexus point for the white identitarian Jewish dialectic. It's all like being consolidated into him. It's like all of this energy is being placed inside him. And he's saying that the Jews can have this, but the whites can't have this. And that only furthers that dialectic. It only furthers tension. And James Lindsay has to know that he's doing this. He's well trained in dialectics. My hope is that he's so blinded by all of this that he doesn't realize what he's doing. Because if he does realize what he's doing, then he's evil, which is, of course, that's the entire point of this podcast. The title of this episode is James Lindsay evil? Because if he knows that he's doing this, that means he's actually trying to drive conflict, which is only going to harm everyone, Jew and Goyim alike. I really hope that's not what he's doing. I really, really hope that is not what he's doing. And we see, and there's so many negative aspects to what James Lindsay has done. People literally now see the world in a specific lens because of James Lindsay. He's queered their perception of reality. We have Colin Wright here. Colin Wright. He says, not seeing any classical liberal mass shooters. Unsurprisingly, they seem to be a product of the woke left and woke right. And of course, this was after the trans shooter, the man who murdered his ex-wife and I think one or two of his kids, and they shot another one and shot somebody else. Horrible, right? He's a trans shooter, but he's also like, and I don't like to say Nazi, but, he had like SS tattoos on him, like Nazi SS tattoos. So he's some sort of neo-Nazi. He's very Jewish critical. And he loves like sort of Israel critical people like Thomas Massey and MTG. So Colin Wright then looks at that and he goes, oh, this guy's woke right. This guy's woke right. And I said to him, it's fascinating how you've completely bought into the woke left right binary and now solely see reality through that lens. James Lindsay really did a number on you. And it's exactly what he's done. The label of woke right, it eradicates any kind of conversation that can be happening. You have James Lindsay and Joel Berry and Seth Dilling saying that, oh, America's just a creedal nation. America's just a creedal nation. And that's the only thing that it is. So Seth Dillon earlier posted, citizenship can't be lost by rejecting American principles. That would violate the principles. So yes, you can believe any ideas you want and still be an American by law, even if you aren't one in spirit. And that idea is called freedom. Giving that up wouldn't be the end of the people, but it would be the end of America. So I responded, I was like, so you're saying what makes you an American is believing what the founding fathers believed. But if you don't believe that, that doesn't mean you're not an American. You're still an American, even if you're not an American. So he's differentiating between someone who is an American in spirit and someone who's an American citizen, right? And so you could be an American citizen, but not actually be an American in spirit. So it's this sort of like platitude that is not actually applicable to the real world. It's completely useless. How can that ever work out in any form of policy? America is both obviously an idea and a people. And if you get rid of the idea in the people and replace the people that held to the original ideal of America, that's not America anymore, right? So you have to be able to retain the native population and try to have them adhere to what you believe of what America to be based on an idea. And this is just another sort of conflict that has been going on between, say, like a more dissident right figure that is more about America as a shared people and, coming from like, Anglo backgrounds and stuff like that, as opposed to just Seth Dillon, James Lindsay, and Joel Berry being that America is just an idea. It's neither. So everyone is talking past each other and nobody can have any conversation. And everyone on James Lindsay's side thinks that every single person on the dissident right side that is actually trying to have a conversation about this is just woke. So in the same way that James Lindsay destroys all conversations surrounding sort of the leftist, esoteric, like communist strains that are found within in some parts of Judaism, the way that he's destroyed all conversation on there and is just building up energy that has to be released, he's done the same thing when it comes to what is an American. And so he's playing dialectics. He's using postmodern deconstructionist concepts and theory to redefine what woke is. And then if anyone else does that, his new redefining of woke means that means that they're woke. But by his own new definition of woke, that makes him woke. So like at this point, like James Lindsay knows what dialectics are. And the only hope is that he's so blinded by Israel and the Jewish people as a whole. I mean, he did release one episode. I think it was the Am Yisrael Chai episode. The Jewish people live or the Jewish people survive or whatever. And so James Lindsay is not an overly emotional guy in his podcasts. He's got a short fuse online, but he's not an over emotional guy. But at the end of that episode, I think it was that episode, he became so overwhelmed with emotion while talking about like visiting the Holocaust museums in Israel that he started crying. Which, if you have that kind of emotion surrounding this, and then you're going to try and defend this image of what you've constructed in your head of Judaism and Israel to be, to me, that's almost like a religious experience. It kind of seems like a religious experience. So that's the only thing that may lead me to believe that James Lindsay is blinded. This is his weak spot, but he's still lying. He's still, manipulating people. Well, if anybody else tries to manipulate anyone else, he just calls them woke, even though he's doing the same thing. So he's still a hypocrite. But I don't know, man. I don't know. Like he knows these sort of woke strains exist within Judaism, so he is lying. So I don't know if he is. I hope that he doesn't realize that he's making things worse. Because if he realizes he's making things worse, then that, I suppose that does mean that he is evil. Which brings me to the end here. I posted today, the ultimate red pill about James Lindsay is realizing he's not a classical liberal. He's a post-World War II liberal. So his followers that fully adopt his epistemology are also post-World War II liberals. Once you realize this, you finally have an answer to the James Lindsay question. his diagnosis of woke as being completely Gnostic or Hermetic, it's incorrect. And the thing is, I think James knows that's incorrect. I think that he lied. And I guess I could try to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he lied and thinks that if the sort of Kabbalistic roots were to be revealed, that it's just going to cause conflict and harm the Jewish people as a whole. That would be me trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But again, all he's doing is just building up the tension and making things worse. And with his training in dialectics, he should be able to understand that lying about this would only make things worse. What's ironic about all of this is that, James Lindsay often talks of people who engage in dialectics as wizards because they're hermeticists and Gnostics, and that, engaging in the dialectic by, marrying a truth to a lie in order to try to change society is wizardry, that it's alchemy, and it is, of course. And I've always liked this framing because I'm a dramatic guy and I've always liked tales of good and evil. And so to look at manipulative psychopaths that want to shape humanity for their own purposes as evil wizards, it's alluring. The thing is, because James Lindsay is a post-World War II consensus liberal, he's been doing exactly what he's been accusing others of doing this entire time. Yeah, James Lindsay has been, he's been undoing the lies of the queer theorists and of the critical race theorists. He's been undoing these alchemical magic spells. An example where basically it's like, oh yeah, black people kind of had it rough, and we ended slavery, and then we gave them the right to vote, ended desegregation. Okay, cool, now we're all equal, right? Well, no, the leftists will say, oh no, you don't understand. It's actually worse now, because now white supremacy is invisible and it's embedded in every single institution. And the only way to get rid of it and make things right is to discriminate against groups that are more successful than blacks, specifically white people, because there is a large racial hatred element in this, since white people are cast as the ultimate oppressors because of white Christian colonization, European Christian colonization, whatever you want to call it. And so the only way to undo this systemic racism and invisible white supremacy is to discriminate against those whites until black people are finally equal in outcome. We finally achieved equity, which of course that would never happen. And so James Lindsay undid this spell that has been cast on so many people. I mean, it literally is a spell. People's minds have been taken over by this. They view all of reality through this lens. He did the same thing with queer theory. The thing is, though, as he was doing that, he was casting his own spells, lying about how this is entirely a Gnostic and Hermetic phenomenon, lying about people who, while some of them may be post-liberal and bent on the dissident right, not all of them are evil. Not all of them are white supremacists. Not all of them have a truly demonic, irrational hatred of Jewish people. And, there are people that cannot separate the fact that there are elite Jewish leftists who are globalists that are making all of this happen. There are people that can't separate those people from the Jewish people themselves, right? Just some Jewish guy who's just, he owns a kosher deli. It's like, yeah, that does exist. But at the same time that James Lindsay was dispelling, he was, removing these spells that these leftists cast, he's been casting his own spells. He's been casting a spell that there's nothing to see when it comes to Kabbalah. There's nothing to see at all. And if you see it, it just means that you're falling for a dialectical trap, and then you're just a bigot and you hate Jews, and there's nothing else there. He's been casting the spell that he is a classical liberal, when in reality, he's a let's just say post-war liberal. It's cleaner. In reality, he's a post-war liberal. that wants to keep things that happened in the 20th century in terms of legislation that the original classical liberals, the people that founded the country, would not agree with. So he's been wearing the skin suit of classical liberalism. And this is perhaps the most nefarious and definitely the most insidious kind of manipulation. Undoing the manipulation of other manipulators while also at the same time manipulating people for your own benefit. Indoctrinating people into your worldview, convincing people that you were the paragon of goodness and truth and classical liberalism. And now he has a multi-episode series on James Lindsay reading the Bible. One of the last people in the world that anyone should listen to when it comes to Christianity and biblical accuracy is James Lindsay, because what he's doing is that he's trying to co-opt the minds of Christians even further into his madness and manipulate scripture, the word of God, information gifted to us through divine revelation. He's trying to manipulate. I haven't even listened to it, but I know that's what he's doing. Just like he's done with everything else. He's manipulating the word of God to inculcate people into his worldview and how he views you should worship Christ. It's a sleight of hand trick. With his right hand, James Lindsay is undoing the manipulations surrounding progressivism and leftism, critical race theory, and queer theory, and the incursions upon our society in reality that communists, Fabian socialists, leftists have been perpetrating on all of us. That's what he's doing with his right hand. With his left hand, he is holding in his left hand a wizard's wand and distracting you with the right while casting his own spell with the left. It's genius, honestly. So, I don't know, man. Is James Lindsay evil? Maybe. That's all I got. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you have a good night. Remember, we're all retarded here. Severely retarded. Every single person on this podcast and that listens needs a helmet. But hopefully, if we hang out enough, we all will become a little bit less retarded. Take care.